The second half of the year, African countries struggle to grow their economies. This after a gloomy outlook for the year, partly caused by a slump in commodity prices and the end of a flood of cheap dollars. In Somalia, the country was encouraged to focus on strengthening the key building blocks for stability and growth as it recovers from more than 2 decades of civil war.
According to the UNDP, about 73% of the Somali population lives below the poverty line of $2 a day. That said, economic conditions have recovered significantly since the end of the civil war, and in particular, in 2014, GDP is estimated to have grown by about 4%. Inflation remained low at about 1%.
In Burundi, the nation's beleaguered economy weighed heavily on the population as protests and political uncertainty continued in the country after President Pierre Nkurunziza decided to run for a third term. Nkurunziza's opponents say his bid for another 5 years in office is unconstitutional. In the restive neighborhood of Cibitoke, traders complained that business was slow at the time.
I am not making any money. I hardly make enough money to eat. I used to sell cases of beer, but now I am lucky if I sell even one. It's over and there are no customers.
As China faced a sharp fall in its stock market, which in turn hurt African commodity exporters, many fear that an era of Chinese-funded airports, roads and railways on the continent would be a risk. A boom in China brought many benefits to Africa. Beijing has won fulsome praise from many governments for its willingness to finance massive infrastructure projects. Without conditions relating to democracy, governance and human rights, Africa has often criticized in aid from the West. Chinese economic growth rates averaging 10% a year for almost a decade fueled the commodities supercycle, which lifted Africa's own growth to unprecedented rates.
Because China is such an important player on world markets, especially in respect of the demand for commodities, the fact that it is slowing down and the demand for commodities is falling has resulted in commodity prices themselves declining sharply. And this has resulted in the currencies of countries that are heavily dependent upon exporting commodities to suffer.
In Kenya, a cash flow crisis being faced by the government saw the shilling lose 14% against the dollar this year, and interest rates climbed by 300 basis points in October. At the same time, 2 mid-tier commercial banks were placed under receivership by Central Bank of Kenya. This included Imperial Bank Kenya Limited, which left customers in anxiety about the fate of their deposits should the company go into liquidation. Analysts said it was a temporary scenario and was not indicative of systematic economic faults in the country.
It's a temporary thing which should not be viewed as a picture of the economic performance of the country. Similarly, for the banking sector, what happened to what happened to Imperial Bank and Dubai Bank previously should not be seen as something that is prevalent for the whole banking sector. It's a unique thing that happened to the specific bank and is not a reflection of the whole industry. It is not a systemic problem.
The World Bank's Africa Pulse report announced in October that economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa was set to slow to 3.7% this year from 4.6% in 2014, its weakest pace since 2009, mainly due to the drop in commodity prices. Factors hampering growth vary among countries. In the region's commodity exporters, especially oil producers such as Angola, Equatorial Guinea and Nigeria, as well as producers of minerals and metals such as Botswana and Mauritania, the drop in prices is negatively affecting growth. In Ghana, South Africa and Zambia, domestic factors such as electricity supply constraints are further stemming growth. In Burundi and South Sudan, threats from political instability and social tensions are taking an economic and social toll.
The Pulse finds that with weaker global market conditions underpinned by sharply lower commodity prices, as well as a slowdown in growth in China and tightening global financial conditions, all these factors are weighing down on sub-Saharan Africa's growth.
The report said Ivory Coast, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Mozambique and Tanzania are still expected to grow robustly, posting 7% or more growth per year between this year and 2017. Tanzania, which has a reputation as one of the politically stable countries in the region, and one of the fastest growing economies in East Africa, was gearing up for elections at a time when the world commodity prices were taking a hit and unemployment was on the rise. Campaigns exposed public frustration with the pace of change in a country endowed with gas and mineral deposits, but lagging behind other regional economies.
Sisi wenyewe tuna familia, tuna watoto, tuna mke.
We have families, we have children, wives, we have people we are taking to school, and our parents in the countryside depend on us because we live in the city like other successful people. I think we are very key shareholders in this country, especially youths who make up the biggest percentage of the population.
Overall, growth in the region is projected to pick up to 4.4% in 2016 and further strengthen to 4.8% in 2017. The World Bank recommends that countries focus on more investment in new energy capacity, attention to drought and its effect on hydropower, reform of state-owned distribution companies, and renewed focus on encouraging private investment will help build resiliency in the continent's power sector.